Good afternoon, everybody. And Darrell is smiling. I asked him to smile earlier. He's still smiling. This is a good day. Thanks, everybody, for coming to this session. It's really one of those great times when we heard in the first plenary a little challenge from Barb about Earth system modeling, and then we heard a few things this morning in the plenary about how we're going about doing that. But you always have to stop a little bit, step back, and award the people that make it happen. Because it's the people that really make it happen. So we're excited to be here and to be able to do that today. I did want to pass on one announcement. There are, at the Pecora conference, for this conference, 427 registrants. So applaud yourselves. So that's a great outpouring. That's a great interest. And Sioux Falls thanks you for being here. I'd like to ask Mike Freilich and Bill Werkheiser to come up here, and they're going to present the William T. Pecora Awards for 2017. And as you know from this morning, Mike serves as the director of the Earth Science Division at NASA, and Bill is one of my bosses, and he's a really good guy. And he's the acting director of the USGS. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mike. Mike.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks to all of you for joining us for this definitely pleasant occasion here where we recognize some of our own. So NASA and the Department of Interior jointly sponsor the Pecora Award, which has been presented annually since 1974 to recognize outstanding contributions of individuals and groups toward the understanding of the Earth through remote sensing. It comes as no surprise to any of you that the award honors the memory of Dr. William T. Pecora, former director of USGS and Undersecretary of the Interior. Now, Dr. Pecora was a motivating force between our nation's establishment of civil remote sensing of the Earth from space. His early vision and support led to what we know today as the Landsat satellite program, an endeavor that has provided us with a continuous record of the Earth's land areas for more than 45 years, and that has fundamentally altered how we observe and understand our planet. And now I'm going to go a little off script. So let me say here in front of all of you that vision and support are absolutely essential, but so also are creative and expert contributions sustained over the decades from a whole host of teams and communities. That's you. You keep unwavering focus on the goals that were laid out by William Pecora, and you ensure that our activities and our investments meet the evolving needs of our nation and indeed of our entire species. As you'll hear, the award winners today truly reflect the vision and the passion of Dr. Pecora. It's a pleasure for me to join with USGS to present the 2017 William T. Pecora Awards to an outstanding group and to an individual whose contributions can only be described as monumental. Before we make this year's presentations, though, we'd like to recognize former winners of the Pecora Award who are attending the conference today. So if you've gotten this award before, please stand, don't be shy. And now, for the presentation of the group award. On behalf of NASA and USGS, I take great pleasure in presenting the 2017 William T. Pecora Group Award to the International Charter on Space and Major Disasters. Now, I mean, giving the award to a charter is like giving an award to, you might think it's like giving an award to the Constitution or the Magna Carta or something, but that's not the case at all. And originally I was going to read a rather lengthy, factual, but nonetheless turgid description of what the charter is. But in fact, Tom Holm found a most remarkable visual description of the charter, and so we'll play that for you in lieu of me reading the citation. And Tom's going to do it so it doesn't take 10 minutes to get it up, as would be the case with me.
Almost every week, a natural disaster happens somewhere around the world. We often watch them unfold live on the news, when forests go up in flames, when settlements collapse after an earthquake, and roads and bridges are torn away by landslides, when volcanoes erupt or severe floods wash away our communities under torrents of water. When major disasters threaten, the lives of thousands can be put at risk. Time is of the essence, and rapid, accurate data can be crucial, particularly if search and rescue teams have to access very remote terrain. Today, satellites are some of the most helpful observers on our planet. From orbit, they can see through the clouds, detect storms and fires, and even reveal the slightest movement in the Earth's crust, literally anywhere in the world. However, satellites are always moving. They pass over a region affected by a disaster for only a few seconds and return anywhere from hours to days later. It is unlikely that a single satellite would be in place to witness a disaster when it happens. But there are many satellites circling our planet, each on a different track and capturing different views of our Earth. The chance of getting the perfect picture of the disaster zone is much higher if rescue teams can combine all of these views and pick the best of them. This is the idea behind the International Charter Space and Major Disasters, founded in the year 2000 by the European, French, and Canadian space agencies, providing the best available satellite pictures to help with disaster relief and recovery anywhere in the world, and doing it without expecting anything in return. Today, more countries from all around the world have chosen to commit their satellites to help provide the information necessary to understand the impact of major disasters, what has happened, who has been affected, and how to respond effectively. And every country in the world can access this information through the universal access the International Charter offers. An earthquake in Asia. One satellite has provided a high-resolution image of the area before, and another satellite passes over just after the tremor. The images show where homes and villages have collapsed and where roads have been blocked by landslides. Rescue teams have up-to-date information in hours, helping them decide how to access the affected area and where they can do the most good. A volcanic eruption in Africa. Special satellites are configured to observe the lava, smoke, and dust, and to deliver high-resolution maps of the affected communities. Experts can accurately assess whom to evacuate and where to establish a safe refugee camp. Flooding in Europe. A satellite gauges the amount of rainfall, while another measures the rising water level through the clouds. Yet another satellite delivers the latest map of affected areas, while others track the next storm brewing over the horizon. Citizens can be warned, trains stopped, roads closed, dams fortified, to help manage the worst of the water. We cannot prevent natural disasters from happening, but we can help to manage their consequences. Satellites provide rapid, accurate information anywhere around the world, 24 hours a day. The International Charter Space and Major Disasters is helping to save lives wherever disasters strike.
Said far better, I think, than any of us possibly could. So, representing the charter here are John Hahn, USGS representative on the International Charter Board and Deputy Director of the EROS Center, and Brenda Jones and Eric Wood from here at the USGS EROS Center. Will the three of you please join me on stage?
So would the project managers and the EROS team please come up forward also?
Okay. So the humanitarian mission, design, and implementation of the International Charter, Space and Major Disasters make it highly deserving of the William T. Pecora Group Award. Black and citations signed by Secretary of the Interior and the Acting Administrator of NASA. Congratulations.
So I asked some of the team, the project managers and the folks here at EROS to come up also. The International Charter is a great organization, and many decades of research have been done with satellites and remote sensing over the years. But natural disasters are, of course, much more acute, and unfortunately, they don't always happen at a good time of day and when things are normal. The folks that are project managers here and the ones around the charter organizations around the world, they respond and reach out to help their fellow man when a disaster occurs. Whether it's in the middle of the night, whether it's Christmas, whatever time of day it is, these folks get together. They're the ones that respond. They get the satellite data accumulated and into the right place where the decision makers can access that data so that they can make decisions rapidly and help out the folks in their countries. So these are the ones that really make the charter happen, and they're the ones that do the work, and they're fellow project managers around the world. And so I'd like to ask you once again to help me recognize them. So as Mike said, I am the USGS representative on the board, and I'm ably assisted by Eric and Brenda. In fact, they probably keep me under control and make sure that I don't step off the edge of the world somewhere. Also, there are many nations part of this, and the charter board chairman is rotated through the member countries. So the current member charter, Maurice, has recorded a video for us, again, to thank everybody and recognize this award.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, I cannot be with you this afternoon, but it's a privilege to be able to briefly introduce the International Charter on Space and Major Disasters. My name is Maurice Bourgeot, and I'm the head of the department dealing with all aspects related to science, application, and climate at the Earth Observation Program. Is a representative to the board of the Charter since 2011, and currently the chair of the Charter for the coming 6 months since October. We recently held our 38th board meeting, and all the members of the 16th agency constituting the Charter were delighted to learn that the Charter has been awarded the prestigious William Thomas Pecora Team Award. As you know, the Pecora Team Award is presented annually to recognize outstanding contribution by individuals or teams using remote sensing to understand the Earth, including the support to natural or human-induced disaster response. I think the later part of the quote fits exactly to the goal the Charter is striving to achieve. The Charter was initiated at the third United Nations Conference on the Exploration and Peaceful Uses of Outer Space in Vienna in 1999, and was formally founded in 2000 by the European Space Agency ESA, France Centre National d'Études Spatiales CNES, and the Canadian Space Agency CSA. Since then, 13 additional members have joined the international organization, and we are about to welcome the 14th member, the United Arab Emirates Space Agency. I will not enter too much in the details about the functioning of the Charter, as you have just watched the Scribble video shown at the occasion of the 15th anniversary of the Charter. This video was, by the way, presented for the first time during a board meeting of the Charter that was hosted precisely here in Sioux Falls in 2015 by USGS. In the name of the Charter, it's a true honor to receive the Pecora Team Award, and I would like to thank the 16 agencies that are working with great professionalism in the coordination of satellite resources so that Earth observation data can be delivered as soon as possible after a natural or man-made disaster has struck. Unfortunately, this is happening more and more frequently, and since its first activation in 2000, the Charter has been raised 556 times in 122 countries. While the operation level of the Charter has reached a nominal regime of around 40 activations per year since 2008, this year alone, 2017, has been particularly busy with already 39 activations from January to September, mainly due to the recent devastating hurricanes over the Caribbean region and in the USA, or the recent earthquake in Mexico. I'd like again to thank the Pecora Selection Committee for awarding this impressive recognition to the Charter, and in the name of the 16 Charter Agency, it's with great honor that I accept it. I'd like also to thank USGS, member of the Charter since 2005, and show my gratitude to its representatives in the Charter, including Frank Kelly, John Hahn, Brenda Jones, Eric Wood, and Thomas Cecere. In the name of the International Charter on Space and Major Disasters, let me conclude by showing my deepest appreciation for receiving this prestigious Pecora Award. Thank you very much.
Well, congratulations to the International Charter team. That was a truly an impressive accomplishment. Now, it's my great honor to be able to present the individual award to Dr. Darrell L. Williams. And Darrell currently is the chief scientist for global science and technology, but he spent 35-year career in NASA as a very influential person there. And you know, as I read through his biography and his accomplishments, it was clear that there was far too many in order to describe fully here, so I'm going to hit some high points. But those accomplishments, I thought, went back to his days in Penn State when his master's thesis was on the digital processing of Landsat 1 data. But it turns out that it actually goes back even further than that, when he was a child riding in his father's Piper Cub and remotely sensing the information below him from Dad's plane. So clearly that indicated your love of the science as we've gone through time. But during his time at NASA, early on in his career, Darrell got involved in Landsat, and particularly Landsat 4 and 5, and was instrumental in the MMS and the TM instruments on those satellites, and have made great contributions there. And then later on in his career, back in I guess it was 1992, after the Landsat mission came back into NASA, he got involved in the Landsat 5 and 7, and shepherded both those missions to extremely successful and extremely long-lived and very significant contributions to those missions. So it's clear that Darrell has spent his life, really, in forwarding the vision of remote sensing, and in particular the Landsat program. And Darrell, you told me your email address. I forgot, what is it? doclandsat@gmail.com. I think that pretty much says it all. So you know, and then currently as the chief scientist at Global Science and Technology, he's been forwarding and pressing forward on innovative follow-up missions to Landsat and innovative approaches to remote sensing and learning about the Earth. So, and he's also a co-author on the Landsat Legacy, which will be, I guess, officially unveiled this afternoon. I hope we can all go there and take part in that ceremony. So in short, Darrell's career has been dedicated to development and advancement of digital remote sensing in the Landsat program. His achievements are in the true spirit and in the vision laid out by Director Pecora and Secretary Udall nearly 50 years ago. And I think, I don't think there's anyone more deserving of this award than Dr. Darrell L. Williams.
Just bear with me here a minute. I'd like to express my thanks to a variety of
individuals and groups, starting off with USGS and NASA for co-sponsoring the Pecora Award, to the selection committee for their hard work in evaluating nominations. To my career mentors and former Pecora recipients, Vince Solomonson and Sam Goward, thank you. I'd like to thank my current employer, Global Sites and Technology, for giving me a nice place to advance some of my thoughts in this arena. Excuse me. I guess it just shows how important it is. Most importantly, I'd like to thank my wife, Bonnie, for her lifelong support. She was supposed to be here, but she unfortunately got sick at the last minute. But it's been 45 years and counting, and I think you heard the 45-year reference earlier by Mike. So little did I know that the summer of 1972 was going to be so big in my life. About 5 weeks after I walked down the aisle, something called Earth 1 was launched. Of course, I had no clue. I was between my junior and senior year at Penn State. And anyway, it came on, and it's easy for me to remember how long they've been in orbit. So I'm truly honored and humbled to join such an august list of prior recipients, many of whom I feel fortunate to call good friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. Curtis Woodcock, Steve Running, Compton Tucker, Chris Justice, Forrest Hall, John Townsend, Jeff Dozier, Marv Bauer, Alan Strahler, Alex Getz, David Landgrebe, and Virginia Norwood, to name a few. I'm also delighted to receive the award at the unique biennial setting that the Pecora Conference provides, and I'm further delighted to receive the award here in EROS's backyard, the Mecca of Landsat data. A few years ago, when I witnessed Chris Justice receive the award, Chris stated that, in his opinion, the Pecora Award had become the highest and most coveted honor Earth remote sensing. And obviously, I agree wholeheartedly. I'm just about done here, bear with me. Back in 2000, I was honored to be tapped along with R.J. Thompson of EROS to receive the Pecora Team Award on behalf of the highly successful Landsat 7 mission team. Today, in all honesty, I'm essentially receiving another team award. Because without the help of a large team of people, I would not be able to accomplish the things in my career that made it possible for me even to be placed into consideration for this individual award. To all those team members, you know who you are, and you have my deepest gratitude. Thank you.
That was a great ceremony, wasn't it? It means a lot to a lot of people. For the charter, it means responding when you need to respond and getting the information when it needs to be there. And obviously, for Darrell, it means an awful lot. And we congratulate both award winners for that. Before I go on to start the next session, I have a walk-on award that I'd like to take care of. Jesse, if you could come up here, I will. This is the Conference Management Award, and it's from the Pecora 20 Steering Committee and ASPRS, and it's presented to Tom Holm and Bruce Quirk in absentia. Tom, come on up. It's for their exemplary hard work and organizing skills that have made this conference such a great success.
Back and wrap them over the head.
For not being here, yeah, you can do whatever. So again, what's really interesting now is we have a great opportunity because we have some Pecora Award winners here. Stan Moraine in just a few moments is going to start a session, and maybe I'm supposed to start that, but we'll just go with what we have. And it's going to be perspectives on progress and challenges in remote sensing. And Stan won the award in 2007. And he's really one of those individuals who not only was everywhere nationally, he was international. He spent time working in academia, he spent time in industry, he spent time working with the government. So it's really good to have Stan here. So I'm going to ask Curtis and Sam to come on up. And we already have Darrell up here, a recent awardee from what I understand. And so I will turn it over to Stan. It's yours.
I probably will be shifting back and forth between my stacks of notes. I cannot express completely my feeling is very much the same as yours. In fact, in Ottawa, they had to carry me off the stage. It's not a small thing. But I really appreciate the opportunity to share a few ideas with you, and most particularly, and the thrust of this session is to get expressions from Darrell, Curtis, and Sam. The reason I get so choked up about this is that being in Sioux Falls reminds me very much of an old friend of mine, Donald Moore, who has a room named after him at the center. And the thing that was so poignant was that if I had a mission in Senegal, I would arrive there at whatever hour the airplane got us there, and I'd find myself walking the halls of the hotel just to find out, get my bearings and time zone straightened out. And son of a gun, if Don Moore wasn't walking the opposite direction, this happened over and over and over again. And I got to wondering, how does this guy have the time to go to these meetings? I go there because I'm curious about the world. I wanted to see what was going on, and there were plenty of meetings to take me to them. And I was just absolutely floored when I learned of his untimely demise. I don't know if Mary DeVries is in the audience or not, but I'm looking to see if she might be. I don't see. Mary, are you there? Mary was a coordinator between Don and me on many things, and was I don't remember the exact relationship, Mary, but I was very, very pleased to shake your hand yesterday, and you brought back a flood of memories for me. What were we doing in all of these travels? We were spreading the word. And in those days, Landsat was the word. And the popular phrase was, and this is not a dig at the data center, but the phrase, I'm sure you've all heard it, was, "Someday my prince will come." And things have really progressed nicely since those days. I'm not here to talk about my experiences, but the three speakers will give you, I'm pretty sure, a phenomenal insight into the evolution of applied remote sensing, and I'd like to ask them to keep their remarks to 15 minutes, perhaps, 20 at the outset, or outside, I should say, so that we can keep ourselves on time. So with that, I'd like to draw your attention, for those of you who may not have already read the book thoroughly, there are biographical sketches on pages 26 and 27 for the speakers. So with that, I'd like to turn it over. And by agreement, we're going to start with Curtis, I believe. No. We're going to start with you. Going to go. Okay, good deal.
I'll see if I can be a little more professional this time. I'm the only one using slides, and we thought it helps set the context for the title of the panel session. All right, so the title of the session was Perspective on Progress and Challenges in Remote Sensing, a discussion. I'm going to have some slides up here. I'm not going to present the slides per se. There's the background material. And so with that, I'll get going. The challenge, I'm going to start off with, instead of, so it was progress and challenges, I'm going to start off with the challenges. So the Landsat science team seeks to improve temporal repeat as a very high priority, and perhaps the highest priority. So then the question becomes, how often do we have to observe? And if you see on the left, we're real good now with a stack of images for most anywhere in the globe. But further on the right is the annual green up spectral reflectance. And what we need to do is observe more often, during the growing season. So then the question becomes, how often do we really have to observe? And so I'm not going to present all the details here, but Sam and I conducted a study using daily MODIS repeat, which happens to be in the same day as Landsat 7. And we found out that for most vegetated regions of the Earth, you basically need daily global repeat if you want to cobble together a cloud-free weekly picture. And, agriculture grows, it needs a certain amount of rainfall, therefore clouds, and so unless we have center pivot irrigation, it's a necessity to view more often. We've done amazingly well with 8-day repeat, but we could be doing better. So the next several charts, I'd like to give credit. I've stolen them from some charts that John Christopherson presented at the recently, the JC, the Joint Agency Commercial Imagery Evaluation Workshop that was held at USGS headquarters in Reston back in mid-September. I'll give a shout out for John tomorrow in session 26, 10:30 to noon, room 3. He'll be giving a more thorough presentation, of these charts. So by way of, airborne is the kind of the precursor to space. There's been a lot happening in aerial remote sensing, new sensors, computer power has finally caught up. I know when Vince and I were working on Landsat 4 and 5, everybody was frustrated with, it's only you, federal research places that have tape readers that can read 1600 or 6250 BPI. Nobody can process this stuff, you know, et cetera. So finally, computing power is no longer an obstacle. Then there's the commercial activity. And it's a dollar sign, the pound, the euro, and back to dollars. But funding has risen some 400% in the 5-year period or 3-year period from 2012 to 2015. Over $4 billion there. A little bit of a fall off in 2015. But then I have this flash update that I kind of pasted in on top of John's chart. Just on October 26th, I found an article from Euro Consult's report saying that they expect by 2026 it'll be an $8.5 billion market, and there's an alternative model that would put the number more like 15 billion. So there's an evolving focus that's been going on. Early on it was, hey, we have some images. The industry took that image, the customer did the analysis. Now the analytics are moving to the foreground, many levels and options, and so much data to be data fused. It's a wonderful time, but it could be even better. So then we have this era of the big data, the big buzzword, but it is quite real. And I appreciated this presentation, the 3 V's, the volume, the velocity, and the variety. And actually there's a 4th V that I'll show you here in a minute. But from the volume standpoint, as big as the Landsat archive is now, it's been downloaded in its entirety multiple times. The whole cloud computing, we kind of busted through some of the early concerns about data thievery and other nuances, but it's becoming a safer environment. Landsat scene delivery from 1970s to the 90s, days, weeks, and months. And if I could just do an aside, about in the 1996 timeframe, Ghassem Aswar, who was in Mike's position at headquarters at the time, contracted with a group to do a documentary leading up to, it was more about EOS and Terra than Landsat, but of course, Landsat was a lot of the precursor and they needed to show things. So Ghassem made it a high priority for me to, as project scientist, to line up the imagery data sets that were needed for that documentary. It took months. I mean, it's 20 years ago, let's say it was 97, but literally I had to call the Japanese station on my own, say, hey, I'm Darrell Williams, I'm the NASA project scientist, and I need your help. I need some images of the rapid growth of Sichuan, China or something. And it just, today you could just sit down and get all that, but back then it was a major undertaking. So as far as variety, as we know, the variety is exploding. Imaging satellites, airborne, LiDAR, et cetera, the list goes on and on. And then there's this 4th V, the veracity, or also there's the validity, the whole having a calibrated thread all the way back through the entire archive. And we all have been hearing, if you go into some of the CalVel, you know, that Landsat is kind of the gold standard that everybody wants to calibrate back against. But in all this, quality is more important than ever. Poor quality data, and I don't know how they came up with this evaluation, but they're saying poor quality of data, it costs the economy $3.1 trillion. And then another survey showed that 1 of 3 decision makers don't trust their information. So this was an advertisement to the work of the people who attend JC, which is across the spectrum, commercial value added, data handlers, government, et cetera. And so the work of the JC, which is an annual meeting, is more important than ever. So then there's also, once I retired and didn't have some of the encumbrances of being a civil servant, I could speak out a little bit more. So you have to speak up, but not everybody will listen. But there's 2 guys here that by the name of Goward and Williams that had an op-ed in Space News about the way things were slip-sliding at that time back in April 2013. So challenges, but progress, and then there's always time for fun. So I'll end it with that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to make some comments. we all wear different hats at different times, and I obviously wear a Boston University hat, but for quite a while now I've gotten to wear a Landsat science team hat. And so my comments are mostly going to be sort of out of that experience, what do I think about going forward with these programs and sort of where they stand and all that sort of thing. And so I'd like to start just real quickly with an introduction by just kind of echoing what I've heard so far at this conference. And first and foremost and loudest and clearest is the fabulous uses of remote sensing and Landsat that are going on around us. I mean, it's really pretty remarkable to go into any of the sessions that are here and see things that were hard to even sort of imagine 5 and 10 years ago. And so the progress is really pretty remarkable and pretty fun to watch and encouraging in all ways. The other thing I heard was really strong expressions of support from the agencies. And you know, the USGS in particular and NASA as it relates to Landsat, wow, we're really at the agency level getting a level of support that is really impressive, and the commitment to sustainable land imaging is fabulous. The growing understanding within the USGS of the roles that Landsat can play throughout the agency, I was really happy to hear all that. One of the things I'd like to particularly sort of highlight is the technology development issue and the expression of the intent to work continuously on technology development, because I think it's a key to a lot of the challenges that we see going forward. And I'll sort of get back to that later in some of my comments. If I can paraphrase Dr. Freilich a little bit, I think we could say that even in the times right now when the importance of science gets challenged in some quarters and isn't necessarily getting the respect it deserves, we're still the world's leaders in science and technology and ought to stay that way. And the only way we're going to do it is by continually getting better at what we do. And so this notion that we're going to continue to invest in the technologies for remote sensing, I think, is very important going forward. So that's kind of what I've heard so far here that I wanted to kind of amplify a little bit. The other thing that I want to do is take a second to point out that my first participation formula, I've been using Landsat data most of my adult life. But my first formal participation in the Landsat program was in a NASA-sponsored Landsat science team that was run by these two guys. And I thoroughly enjoyed that opportunity, and it's quite an honor for me at the moment to be able to speak between the two of them having been mentors of mine in that regard. So it's a pretty nice deal. And so I'd like to take just a minute or two to talk about where I see the program right now, and then go on to where I think we need to go in the future. So overwhelmingly, I view the Landsat program as incredibly healthy right now. Landsat 8 is the best sensor we've had in space. It's collecting more data than any sensor we've had in space. It's doing a better job of geographic coverage, the quality of the observations. It's absolutely fabulous. Landsat 9 is being built, and it's going to be even better. I mean, so we're really in a pretty sweet spot with respect to that dimension of the program. The USGS is also making really good strides on some initiatives that I think everyone's starting to get a handle of and is going to influence us more going forward. And that was in fairly rapid succession, going from our first collection of consistent Landsat data, which the science team had been pushing them for quite a while to do, collection 1, so you could get, so you knew exactly what you were getting in terms of the data, to analysis-ready data, which is, in essence, what we have viewed as the future of data distribution in the Landsat program. And to see the USGS in pretty short order go through two really major steps in this whole process, the whole collections process, and then on to a whole new format and level of processing in the analysis-ready data, I mean, that to me is the sign of a healthy program to be able to respond that way. The other thing that I want to say, and try to make as clear as I can, I think the Landsat archive is the most valuable environmental record we have for the surface of the Earth. And we didn't get there by accident. We got there by a very steadfast devotion to first being global, right from the very beginning, and second to continuity. And so we now have a record over a long stretch of time over the entire planet where we all live on the land surface, where basically almost all of our food comes from, where virtually all of our, most all of our natural resources come from. I think it's the most valuable environmental data record that we have. And we ought to recognize it for what it is and treat it as valuable as it is. Okay, now, for the future. Landsat 10 and beyond, or sustainable land imaging. I'd like to talk a little bit about the role the Landsat science team has been trying to play in this process. The USGS is responsible for the definition of the requirements going forward, and they actually asked the Landsat science team for input. And I say it that way because in the science team that we served on for NASA, and in most of the years that I've been involved with the Landsat program, nobody's ever asked us what we wanted. You know, what our priorities were. We've frequently been asked to try to solve problems, and what can you do with the data, and you know, how should we do things? We've never really been asked what our priorities were. And so we've been working on this for about 1.5 years. And the question is, what our priorities are beyond continuity. And continuity is an important concept here, and we've provided definitions of continuity, and those are available. And so we're in the process of developing a publication. David Roy and Mike Wolder are leading an effort to come out with this, but I thought the messages that are in that were important for this group, and so I thought I would pass them along. And Darrell alluded to the first one, and that is that if you take continuity and say, what's the next step that would improve things the most, 17 out of 23 people on the science team voted for improved temporal coverage, higher frequency of coverage. And that's a message that's been emerging over a couple of decades pretty consistently. I mean, over a decade, pretty consistently. And then the question becomes, what's the target? And Darrell sort of mentioned the target of one clear observation a week. And that's easy to do in arid parts of the world and not so easy to do in some of the cloudiest parts of the world. But it really comes down to the fact that if you go around and listen in the sessions, I think you'll hear this over and over again, more frequent observations improve virtually everything we do as remote sensing. And you can, from the agriculture sector to forestry, all the way through, more observations tends to lead to improvements. The second priority that was highlighted, and this caught me a little bit by surprise, was improved spatial resolution. Everyone, you know, when you start down this discussion of what do you really want, well, you know, we all want hyperspectral data every 10 minutes, you know, for, you know, something the size of a dime. And you know, you can't get that. But, so taken individually and voted for, spatial came in second, and the goal was to try to get to 10-meter spatial resolution, which in essence matches what Sentinel-2 has been providing out of Europe. And the primary sort of drivers for that were ag and water resources, and evapotranspiration, improved urban sort of mapping and monitoring, as well as land cover and forest change done at finer spatial resolution. Third and fourth were really two sides of the spectral question. One was, you know, one approach would be to just add more spectral bands to what we have, and the other would be to go to hyperspectral sensing, really fine spectral resolution. And both of those had support, less than I guess I anticipated, to be honest. The Landsat science team at times has been accused of being against hyperspectral remote sensing, and I think that's absolutely false. Certainly from my perspective, I think it would be fabulous if we could get a hyperspectral sensor in space. Does that mean that we should be doing hyperspectral exclusively for the future of the Landsat program? Probably not, but certainly the notion that we could get hyperspectral sensors in space would be of great value to many people. What came in last is sort of the radiometric quality of the data. And that has to be taken in context because the radiometric quality of Landsat 8 is so much better than anything we have ever had that's a pretty steep hill to climb to try to improve that. And so as long as we can maintain the quality of the data that we've had from Landsat 8, everyone will be quite happy. Now we've always been instructed to stick to providing definitions of observational requirements and leave the solutions to the engineers. And that's probably good advice. But one of the things I do think we have to do is I think we have to own up to some of the harder questions that are coming as we try to plan for sustainable imaging in the future and what that means. And so what happens, for example, if we take the question of temporal frequency and improved observations? If we're going to try to achieve that, try to get to the one clear observation a week, does every one of those observations have to be of the absolute best quality, Landsat 8 quality, for example? Or could we live with filling in some of the temporal gaps with less than the highest possible quality observations? That's a tough question, right? We all want good quality observations, but does every single one of them have to be, the absolute best quality observation? And that's something I think we have to look square in the face. And because, for example, maybe if we have several really good quality sensors in space, then filling in the gaps between them with maybe less quality radiometric observations wouldn't be a bad solution and might be a more manageable thing from a financial perspective. The other way to look at this question, too, is to not ask what ought the future of sustainable land imaging or the Landsat program be, meaning we're going to figure out what the ideal sensor configuration is, put it in space, ad infinitum into the future, but you could instead ask the questions like, well, what would be the most helpful kind of sensor to add given the current and anticipated assets in space? That then puts a different sort of ring on the question and doesn't necessarily tie you to one solution being the only solution for all time going forward. And that becomes something that we might want to think about. In that context, for example, a hyperspectral sensor might not look so bad because it would add to the temporal frequency and open up new applications. Does that mean that every satellite from then on ought to be a hyperspectral sensor? I wouldn't think so, but if you think of it in the context of what would add the most to what we currently have and that sort of thing, it sort of opens up the questions. It also opens up opportunities, for example. As soon as you start thinking about some of these things as possible better partnerships between the public and private sector. If we have some really good quality Landsat satellites, for example, in space, we ought to be able to do a better job of integrating the observations that are coming from less well-calibrated, sensors from the private sector. And we have a challenge. And we as a community need to get better at finding ways to use more disparate kinds of observations in order to fulfill our goals and the opportunities associated with continuity. And so if we do get better at that, it would make some of these commercial solutions a lot more palatable, particularly if those are viewed as augmentations to the Landsat program rather than replacements for the Landsat program. So I got a few takeaway points. so I don't ramble all day. One, boy, we're lucky to live in a very fun time with a very healthy program and all kinds of wonderful stuff going on. I think of you, Vince, when I think about this, because you were so involved in the early days of the Landsat program, and it feels like we're finally fulfilling the promise that's always been there, and that feels pretty good. And I think we have, so that's number one. Number two, we have challenges ahead on defining and maintaining continuity when a wider range of sensors are counted as contributing to that continuity. This is something we need to get better at. The third is we should never give up on progress. I was heartened to hear your comments, Mike, on the investments in technology, but we should never give up on progress. This is the United States of America. You know, we're built on progress, and it's built into our genes, and we should never give up on that. And then fourth, it is my one sort of cautionary note in all this, and that is that we need to be careful about counting on untested capabilities as cornerstones of an operational program. The Landsat program has gotten to where it is by a reliable set of sensors and tested technologies. And in this regard, I guess I would use the model of EO1 as a test of the new generation of sensors that got us to Landsat 8 and 9. That's a good model. That in essence, we didn't make the jump without having known that we were going to do well. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, last but hopefully not least, Sam Goward. Delight to be here at Pecora. I just want to say, Darrell, congratulations. It's been a long time coming, but boy, do you deserve it. Give him an applause. So, I'm sure for those who know me, I've retired back about 5 years ago from the University of Maryland and enjoying my retirement, except we had this albatross called the Landsat Legacy book to work on, which remarkably we finished. And actually I blame Pecora 20 for letting us finish, because otherwise we'd still be editing. The interesting thing about having written that book, and I hope that all of you, this is an ad, buy the book, but it's an amazing story of the American culture that Curtis was just referring to. Because none of this came easy, simple, or never anticipated. This whole thing was perils appalling from day one, and it continues to this day. It never ended. But the message that I really took away from writing that book and interviewing all the people who've been involved, and I hate to tell you, we could fill this room many, many times over with all the people who've been involved over 50 years on the Landsat mission. This is incredible, and it is the American story. But what I've learned is that we have to, as a society, accept our burden of investing in future generations. And in fact, when I look around this room, and I see all the young people and I see them in the hallways, I'm delighted. Because I can tell you, my career has been the best career I could have ever imagined. I would not have done anything differently than I did in my science career. And even in my retirement, I'm still enjoying it, even though it involves writing a book, which I don't necessarily recommend to all of you. But what I see currently, and this is no comment on anyone in the room or anyone in our country in particular, but right at the moment, within the US culture, I see us turning our back on what we have done since World War II and investing in science and technology. And I am worried deeply that we will not be able to keep moving forward on technologies such as Landsat. I hate to tell you, but when Landsat was first thought of, called EROS those days, It was a return beam Vidicon. It was a television camera that shuttered, so it replicated film cameras, but you couldn't use film because DoD didn't even want you to. But anyway, the multispectral scanner was the most bizarre experimental instrument that anybody had ever seen. There was one flown in Michigan on a M7, no, sorry, that was the sensor, on a C-47 aircraft, DC-3. Some of you may not know what that is anymore, but it's a very old airplane that you had to walk uphill to get to your seat. But in those days, that scanner was a one-of-a-kind, and when Virginia Norwood and her team at Santa Barbara said they were going to build one, everybody in the room laughed. And yet, that was the one that survived the first 20 days or some of that operation, and has become the standard by which we do things today. And we've been advancing that technology since that time until we get to OLI, when we finally, how many years after the French? 10 years? 15? Anyway, we went to a linear array sensor. 20, yeah, it was 20 years. Yep. That was a long time coming. Now, much of that had nothing to do with the technology. We could have done it. In fact, several of us were working on it. And because of changing powers that be, that was no longer going to be the case, so we waited another 20 years to get a linear array sensor. When I look at what the commercial marketplace is offering us today in remotely sensed data, I'm seeing 1960s technology being used for that. I'm not surprised. It's readily available, doesn't cost much. You can build the instruments and fly the birds relatively inexpensively. And you know, if you're going to make a profit in a company, that's what you got to do. But that sure shouldn't be the future of what we're doing in this country and observing this planet Earth of ours. And we are only going to get there, particularly if we're talking about increased temporal resolution, because boy, that does not come cheap. You know, if you want to do it with a Landsat 8 technology, you're talking about 16 satellites. What do you think, Mike? It's a challenge. It's a big challenge. So that's not the pathway that'll get us there. The pathway that's going to get us there is to start recommitting our country, and I'm talking to you as taxpayers, not as scientists or people who get funding from the Landsat program. I'm talking to you as taxpayers. We as a society have to recommit to science and technology in this country. And we're doing that not for ourselves, we're doing it for your sons, your daughters, grandchildren, and all future generations that follow us. We harvested what came out of the stresses and strains of World War II. All of you know that. We're still harvesting that technology, but boy, we've got to move ahead. And if we stop investing in science and technology today, we're not going to make it. So all I can say is open up those wallets when you're putting your taxes in, put in a line that says for Landsat 10. Because we got to invest for the future. And that's all I want to say. Thank you. Okay, good. So, how are we doing for time? Oh, we got a half an hour. That's great. We'd really like to entertain all of us questions from the audience because, you know, we've been up here spouting our mouths off and telling you what we think. What do you think? Let's hear from you. Okay. Mics are all on? Good. Yes? Interesting question. I'm sorry? Okay, the question he's pointing out is that we've been talking all about Landsat and not much about, well, I'll go even further back, AVHR, MODIS, VIIRS. Is that record going to be maintained? And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's a NOAA question these days? Sort of, maybe?
NASA and NOAA take continuity seriously to examine data records over evolution of sensors, evolution of measurements, etc. Actually work together. It's not one side or the other, but there is a deep commitment for both near-term operational use, long-term research, level of continuity there.
Great, thank you. Don't be shy. I'm sure you're thinking about something. Darrell?
I don't know how to answer that. Yes, it's a good suggestion.
I mean, I think Darrell actually made a recommendation at one time for CalSat, which would have been the Landsat standard that everybody works against.
Yeah, it came at the JC meeting, which was in mid-September, and Dennis Helder, who's well known and held in regard in the calibration validation, saying with all these other Planet Labs and Skybox and everything, that it's more important than ever that there be a very gold standard, solid calibration standard, and that might be, should continue to be one of the primary roles and attributes of Landsat going forward. We've kicked around back in my 35 years with NASA, and since then, a variety of different approaches to binning and you know, instead of 16 satellites with the current, you go to 8 satellites with twice the swath width. There's a variety of different ways to go, but another way is to try to get the cost down significantly. And that, in the satellite arena, that usually means mass, power, and the equations are all driven by volume, mass, and power. So, and we have demonstrated that there are ways to accomplish, you know, Landsat historical performance, you know, which with a much smaller. In fact, NASA Goddard, the sustained land imaging, has funded activities where they had a mandate: come in with your designs that will meet, you know, 1 meter square by 50 kilograms with, you know, 50 watts of power. And there were several innovative ideas that came in. So they're working the problem. They're working it.
And I guess I'd just like to add that your first comment about there always being something of the caliber of Landsat 8 in space, my comments were all in the context of continuity plus, and the continuity certainly includes that. And so it's really this looking beyond the continuity is what we currently have to what we can add to it that is important going forward.
I haven't looked over this side of the room.
Good suggestion.
That's a good suggestion. I did want to make one comment that I sort of tripped over as I was talking. This idea of investing in advanced technologies isn't just for the technology, it's also to educate our future students, engineers, and scientists. Because in my generation, I never had any problems getting funding to support my work, my research. That's getting to be a bit of a problem right now for our current generation. So you're not just investing in your technological development, you're investing in the future of our community of people who will carry on the work after us. Anyway. Yes, way in the back.
Share my story? I mean, that's me. I don't know what to tell you. Think of it as, there's one less long-haired, deadhead, barefooted student on the streets as a result of Landsat.
Well, I go back to when I was hired at NASA in 1975 with degrees in forestry, and people would look at me, we were doing Apollo, we were getting ready to do the Soyuz Apollo, joint, and the shuttle was still on the drawing board, and people would say, what is a forester doing at NASA? And it was a good question, but we now know in retrospect that Landsat's been great for monitoring forest resources globally for a long time. But what it did do is it put me in a very unique environment, and so I might remember Nixon got impeached and President Ford came in and his son Jack was a forestry student at Utah State. So, they wanted to know what was going on with, and so I hosted Jack Ford at Goddard, and I have an envelope. I invited him to come back out because I only had an hour to brief him and ask him, and so I have a framed envelope from the White House with a 10-cent stamp, because that's what it was in 1976, thanking me for but not coming back. And then people like Elizabeth Taylor, Hugh Downs, Jacques Cousteau, all came rolling through Goddard, and I had the opportunity to present because it was something new and exciting, and never forget those opportunities.
So my story is one of those that actually I just recently was invited back to Indiana State, and I was awarded recognition for one of their outstanding graduates, which I really appreciated. It was really nice to be invited back. But my story goes back to when I graduated there with my PhD, and I'd interviewed, and I think I will not identify the university, but they offered me a position. And then I went to a meeting in New Orleans for my professional organization, and Columbia University and the Goddard Institute for Space Studies were interviewing. And I was offered the job. And the hardest task I had, having accepted that job, was to tell my wife we were moving to New York City from Indiana. And the outcome of that story really is take the opportunities that are presented and go for them, because your career builds from those opportunities. Don't be shy, don't stand back, don't go to that interview because you're not sure. Do it, and you never know what your career is going to offer, because from that time forward, my career blossomed in this field, and here I am today, Pecora winner, getting recognized by my alma mater. I mean, it's been a hell of a career. I wouldn't do it any differently. So go for the opportunities as they present themselves. Okay. Whoop, sorry. Yes. No, it's true. Actually, the students at Indiana State, it's now the Department of Environment, and I can't remember. All of our geography departments have changed their names, much to my chagrin. But anyway, the students there really didn't understand what their education was offering them as opportunities for the future, and I was shocked. I was shocked. And they all said, well, where can I get a job doing that? I said, it's the wrong question. You don't ask that. I said, what excites you? What do you want to do? Where do you want to be in 20 years? Anyway, and they need to hear that message from those of us who've had successful careers and continue to have successful careers. So don't be shy. You're right. Go back and talk to your institutions.
Well, Landsat's always been kind of an anomaly. Normally when you would go to the science team first and ask what you want, but it was kind of been driven the other way, where engineering came and said, this is what we can do, and what might be able to accomplish that with that. So, early on we didn't really understand, not everybody, the importance of consistent calibration. The fact that Landsat images have been awesome looking pictures, but there's so much more than that. They're calibrated radiometry, but you had to have a consistent calibration thread, back through the entire archive. I was fortunate to have a grasp on that and to fund people like John Schott at Rochester Institute and Dennis Helder and others, and they finally cracked the code and have a consistent calibration theme with that standard, and it now has quickly risen to be, as we all know, the gold standard data set in the world, and that's one of the things I'll take great pride in, is helping to ensure that happened. Otherwise, Vince and I caught a lot of grief. We're going, as Terry said, there was an MSS and a TM on 4 and 5 because people were scared they couldn't, it was only those high-fangled federal research institutes that had a 6250 BPI, and so we launched MSS with Thematic Mapper, and but now we've kind of broken through. The computing has caught up, and but still there were certain standards. The WRS system became ingrained, very important. We changed it slightly from WRS1 to WRS2, and a lot of those things you don't realize you're making historical decisions or doing historical things, and it kind of comes out in the book, that we're going to be releasing here tonight. About how that all evolved. So I think it'll be a good read if you're really excited about Landsat, and I think some of those thread lines of the standards will come out through the process of reading through the history.
I actually should point out that, again, this evolution of technology is rather strange. The RBV system, which was considered the primary instrument on Earth's one, wasn't calibrated. And that had its own problems, but the MSS was, but not because we thought calibration was important, because that's how you do line scanners. You have to figure out a line at a time whether the sensitivity of that detector is changing. And so by the accident of putting the MSS on Earth's one, we ended up down the calibration road. And by the way, it also led to digital remote sensing, because for the first time ever, there was a digital camera flown observing the Earth. There were ones that went out to look at other planets, but this was the first digital camera that was ever flown. And that was done not because it could be digital, because hardly anybody knew what to do with that, but because they had a question about line alignment between the scans that the digital data allowed them to solve. So, you know, technology evolves in very strange ways.
One last question. With that, I'd like to thank everybody for your attention. It's a very good question. I'd like to thank our speakers. No thanks to me. Everything worked out fine. Great.
Just bear with me for a minute. I asked Frank for a quick reset because I kind of slobbered through that last paragraph of my thoughts. But I got to say, when I was about a 13-year-old sitting around the Thanksgiving table, dinner table, or Christmas, and would always defer to my grandfather to say the blessing. And he'd be about 2/3 of the way through, and he's sobbing and crying, and I'm sitting there as a teenager thinking, you know, what's going on with that guy? And it's in the DNA, it's in the genes, and it gets worse with age, okay? So what I meant to say was accepting his personal award, to me it was like getting another team award. In high school, I was an interior lineman in football, and you never got any recognition unless you were offsides or holding and they threw a flag. But my entire career has been about a team approach. And there's many people, and you know who you are, is what I meant to say, that helped me accomplish what I was able to accomplish to be eligible for this consideration. And I thank you very much for it. So there we go.
I heard something about a book tonight that's going to be unveiled. It might have been mentioned just a little bit. So please keep that in mind, starting at 5:30 tonight in the exhibit hall. And please be there so we can continue this discussion. And I want to thank Stan for pulling all this and making sure we got through this all right. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the afternoon. And we will see you later on and again tomorrow. Thank you.